When Queen Elizabeth took her final breath, the last person she spoke to wasn't a doctor or a priest. It was her son, King Charles. What she said that night would stay with him forever. Words about faith, truth, and a peace the world never knew she had found. The halls of Buckingham Palace were silent, the kind of silence that feels alive. Rain tapped gently against the windows while guards stood motionless outside, unaware that history was unfolding behind those walls. Inside her private chamber, the Queen sat quietly in her armchair, a single light casting a golden glow across the room. Her crown rested on the table beside her, but her eyes weren't on it. They were distant, thoughtful, searching. For days, she had refused all visitors. Politics, cameras, ceremonies. None of it mattered anymore. She had one last truth to share, something she had carried silently for years. Her attendants were dismissed with a soft but firm command, and she asked to see Charles. When he entered, she didn't look at him as a monarch passing the throne, but as a mother seeing her child. Her voice was frail yet steady. "Charles," she whispered, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I've never told the world." He moved closer, his heart uneasy. The old clock on the mantel ticked louder with each second. She took a slow breath, gathering her strength. The Queen, a woman who had faced decades of duty, pressure, and power, suddenly looked vulnerable. Her gaze drifted to the window where the moonlight shone through the curtains. "I've seen many lands," she said softly. "Places where the call to prayer fills the air, where faith feels alive, not performed." She spoke of her travels to the Middle East, how the sound of the adhan at dawn had touched something deep inside her, a peace unlike anything she had ever felt. She described watching Muslims stand shoulder to shoulder in prayer, rich and poor, rulers and servants, all equal before their Creator. "There was something beautiful in that," she said, "something the world doesn't understand. Humility." Charles listened, frozen, as she continued. She recalled receiving gifts during her reign, among them copies of the Quran. She admitted that she had read them quietly, away from the public eye. "I found verses of mercy, patience, and justice," she whispered. "I found beauty where I was told not to look." Charles's heart began to race. "Mother, are you saying you—" She raised a hand, stopping him gently. "No, Charles. I'm saying I found truth. A truth that belongs to everyone, not just one faith." Her words filled the room with an energy he couldn't explain. She spoke of how the world often misunderstood Islam, how people feared what they didn't know. But she had seen compassion, family, and discipline, not division. "They reminded me," she said, "of Christ's earliest followers, people of faith who live simply and love deeply." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were clear. "I saw reflections of God's grace where the world saw difference." The rain outside grew heavier, tapping like a heartbeat against the window. "I carried this truth for years," she confessed, "because the world wasn't ready to hear it from me. But you must know, you must understand." Then she reached for a small velvet-wrapped book beside her chair. She handed it to him. It was an old Quran, worn at the edges, its pages filled with her handwriting. Notes, underlined verses, small reflections written in pencil. Charles turned the pages carefully, seeing her markings beside words about peace, patience, and unity. "Every time I opened it," she said softly, "I felt calm. I felt close to something higher than crowns or nations." The king-to-be couldn't speak. The woman he had always known as the symbol of English tradition was now speaking with the heart of a seeker. "The world fears what it doesn't understand," she whispered, "but I found peace in what they feared." Silence filled the room. The Queen leaned back, her eyes glistening. "Charles," she said one last time, "remember this. Faith isn't owned by any nation. It's the language of the soul." And with that, her breathing slowed. Her gaze softened, not on the room, but on something beyond it. The rain faded. The Queen, who had ruled a kingdom, left behind a mystery greater than her crown. Charles sat beside her for hours, unable to move. The Quran rested in his lap, its pages fluttering softly in the breeze from the half-open window. Her words echoed in his mind. "The world fears what it doesn't understand, but I found peace in what they feared." When dawn broke, he opened the book again and read one of her underlined verses. Indeed, in the remembrance of God, hearts find peace. He read it slowly, and for the first time he felt her presence in those words. Memories of her travels came rushing back. Her visits to Pakistan, Malaysia, and the UAE. How she would return quieter, reflective. He used to think it was exhaustion, but now he understood. She had seen something sacred in those lands, faith that was lived, not displayed. She once told him, "True faith isn't in ceremony, Charles. It's in humility before the Creator." Back then, he didn't fully understand, but now it was clear. She wasn't turning away from her faith. She was rediscovering its essence. She had found in Islam what Christianity once represented before it was overshadowed by power: simplicity, devotion, surrender. Her private journals, he later discovered, were filled with notes comparing the teachings of Jesus and Muhammad, both calling humanity to mercy, justice, and peace. She had written, "The purity of this message reminds me of what Christ taught before kingdoms claimed his name." As he stood by her chair that morning, Charles realized this was more than a private confession. It was a spiritual inheritance. The queen who ruled over nations had quietly bowed before something eternal: truth. She had left him not just a throne, but a mirror, a reminder that leadership without understanding is hollow. He remembered her saying, "If you wish to lead truly, lead with compassion, not fear." And in that moment, he understood. Her final words weren't rebellion. They were revelation. Days later, when the world mourned her passing, only he knew the full story. Behind the royal image and the ceremonies was a woman who had found peace in faith, not through conversion, but through connection. On her desk lay her diary, open to her last entry. "I am at peace. The world may not understand, but God does." Charles read those words again and whispered, "You found peace, Mother, and I will carry your message." As the bells of London tolled in mourning, he stood at the window looking at the palace gardens. The wind moved gently through the trees, and he could almost hear her voice again. Peace is where you stop searching and start surrendering. And for the first time in his life, he understood what she meant. The Queen's greatest legacy wasn't her crown, it was her heart. She had discovered that faith isn't about boundaries or labels, it's about the truth that connects us all. And in her final hours, she left behind not a secret, but a message: that peace is found not in power, but in understanding.